She only wanted a paycheck. But the moment she walked into the interview, she realized the man who once broke her heart now owns her future. Are you listening from a quiet room or a late-night escape? Tell me where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to subscribe if you're ready for more stories where love is dangerous and fate never forgets. The lobby smelled like money and polish. Glass rose everywhere, walls, elevators, even the ceilings, reflecting a version of herself she barely recognized. Hair pulled back too tight, shoes scuffed no matter how much she'd tried to clean them. Resume folded and unfolded so many times the paper felt soft. She had counted the steps from the subway to the building 3 times just to keep her breathing steady. This was supposed to be an interview, not a miracle, not salvation, just a job. Something stable enough to keep the lights on and the overdue notices from piling higher on the kitchen counter. She approached the reception desk with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Name?" the woman asked, already typing. She gave it. The sound of it still felt like something borrowed, fragile, temporary. "Floor 62, the receptionist said after a pause. "They're expecting you." They. That should have been her first warning. The elevator ride up felt endless, numbers climbing, pressure building in her chest. She went over her rehearsed answers again. Strengths, weaknesses, availability. She didn't have the luxury of being picky. She would smile, nod, and thank them no matter what they offered. The doors opened to silence. Thick carpet muted her footsteps. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped the hallway in light and cityscape. It felt less like an office and more like a throne room pretending to be corporate. An assistant, young, flawless, efficient, greeted her and gestured toward double doors at the end of the hall. "You can go right in." No waiting, no clipboard, no polite small talk. Her pulse spiked. She took a breath and pushed the doors open. The office was enormous. Dark wood, clean lines, a desk that looked more like a statement than furniture. Behind it stood a man, facing the windows, hands clasped behind his back as if he'd been expecting her down to the second. She cleared her throat. "Hi, I'm here for the interview." He turned. Time cracked open. The air left her lungs so fast it hurt. Same height, same shoulders, same stillness that used to make rooms bend around him. Older now, sharper, wrapped in a tailored suit instead of leather and blood-stained reputation. But the eyes were the same. Dark, knowing her. She didn't move. Couldn't. Her mind scrambled for logic, for coincidence, but the truth was immediate and merciless. This wasn't just a man who looked like him. This was him. Her exhale shook. There's been a mistake." He said her name. Softly, correctly, like a memory he'd never put down. Her fingers went numb. She hadn't heard her name in that voice in years. Not since the night she'd walked away without turning back. Not since survival had demanded she vanish. "I didn't know it was you," she whispered. "I swear." "I know," he replied calmly, too calmly. His gaze moved over her, not undressing, not judging, but cataloging damage. Weight she'd lost, strength she'd forced into her posture, fear she was working very hard to hide. "You shouldn't be here," she said, stepping back. "I can leave. I'll leave." He didn't raise his voice, didn't move toward her. "Sit," he said. The word carried something dangerous beneath its polish. Not command. Certainty. Her knees betrayed her. The chair caught her. "This company has over 4,000 employees," he continued, returning to his seat across from her. 3 recruitment agencies, 2 layers of executive screening. She swallowed. "Then why am I here?" "Because destiny has a brutal sense of humor," he said quietly, "and because you walked into my building." Her hands clenched in her lap. "This isn't appropriate. I didn't know. If I had, I never would have applied." "I believe that too." Silence stretched, thick, loaded. I just need work, she said finally. I'm not here for whatever you think this is. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. What I think this is, he said, is the universe correcting something unfinished. Her heart slammed hard against her ribs. We finished it. You made sure of that. He leaned forward slightly. Not threatening. Focused. I let you go because you asked me to, he said. I kept my distance because I promised to. She laughed, a thin, bitter sound. You didn't promise. You decided. And now you've walked back into my life without knowing it, he said, eyes darkening. So, no, this is not an interview. Her chest felt too tight. Then what is it? A pause. Then simply, a reckoning. She stood abruptly, chair legs scraping too loud against the floor. I can't do this. I know, he said, but you will. Her eyes flashed. I don't belong in your world anymore. He looked at her the way he used to when she lied to herself. You never stopped, he said. You just forgot what you were running from. Outside, the city moved. Indifferent. Endless. Inside, past and present collided. And the interview she thought was her escape became the moment everything she buried stood up and stared back at her. He knew the moment her name appeared on the shortlist. Not because it was rare, not because it carried weight, but because it hit him like a bruise pressed too hard, dull at first, then sharp, then impossible to ignore. He'd frozen mid-briefing, tablet in hand, the boardroom continuing around him like nothing had happened. Voices blurred, numbers lost meaning. All he could see was the name printed in sterile black font, stripped of history, pretending to be just another applicant. It wasn't. He hadn't searched for her. That had been the promise. The one thing he'd done right when everything else in his life demanded control. Let her go. Don't look back. Don't turn her into collateral just because loving him had never been safe. But fate didn't care about promises. By the time she stepped into the building, he already knew where she lived, what job she'd left, how close she was to losing the apartment she pretended was temporary. He knew she took the interview because desperation is louder than memory, and still, he hadn't expected her to walk into his office. When she spoke, professional and strained, his chest tightened in a way it hadn't in years. Hi, I'm here for the interview. Same cadence, same careful control layered over fear. Older now, stronger in ways that came from endurance, not ease. She didn't recognize him. That hurt more than he expected. The suit had done its job. Tailored lines, boardroom authority. No visible trace of the man she'd known. The one who'd bled. The one who'd loved without apology. But recognition hit him anyway. Immediate, ruthless, her posture, the way she stood when bracing for impact, the small scar at her wrist she covered instinctively when nervous. His. He turned slowly, needing a second longer to make sure his voice wouldn't betray him. And then he said her name. Not loudly, not gently, truthfully, the way he always had. And watched the moment it landed. Her reaction sliced straight through him. Color draining, breath catching. Eyes widening with something close to fear but sharper. History rushing back all at once. She hadn't forgotten. She'd buried. He watched her scramble to escape, words tumbling, hands shaking, survival instinct flaring. It was familiar. It had always been how she responded when she thought she was cornered. I didn't know it was you, she said. He believed her. That was the cruelest part. Because it meant, if she'd known, she never would have come. She would have chosen hunger over proximity to him. He catalogued the changes without trying to stop himself. The way she carried tension in her shoulders now. The faint shadows beneath her eyes. How thin her coat had been when she walked in. Life hadn't been kind. Neither had he. But while she thought this moment was an accident, some cosmic mistake, he understood what it was. Exposure. She still thought she'd walked into a corporate interview. She didn't realize she'd stepped into a room where nothing about her had ever been forgotten. When she said, "I just need work," something inside him hardened. Because he knew what it meant to need work. Knew what it meant to take the job no matter the price. He'd climbed his empire on that exact principle. And he knew her well enough to understand this wasn't ambition. This was survival. She tried to leave. He let her stand. Let her feel the illusion of control for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Then he spoke again, and everything shifted. He didn't apologize, didn't explain, didn't soften the truth to make it easier to swallow. Because some things deserved honesty. He saw it in her eyes when he reminded her he'd let her go because she'd asked him to. Not because he stopped wanting her. Not because it ever stopped hurting. She'd rewritten the past to survive it, and now the past had a desk, a suit, and the power to rewrite her present. She thought the reckoning was personal. She didn't know yet that it was professional, strategic, unavoidable. As she stood there, shaking but stubborn, he realized something that shifted the balance entirely. She still didn't understand who he was now. She remembered the man she ran from, not the one who owned the building, not the one who knew exactly where every scar she carried came from, because some of them had been earned loving him. And when this was over, she would know. Because the moment his voice said her name again, steady, certain, unafraid. There was no version of this where he didn't see her clearly, and no version where he let her disappear twice. The office didn't smell like cigarettes and gasoline the way his old world had. It smelled like leather and clean air and money that pretended it had never touched blood. And yet, standing there, watching her fight the instinct to run, every memory clawed its way up from where he'd buried it. Too hard, too fast, too dangerous. That's how it had always been between them. He remembered the first night like a bruise you press even though it hurts. Her laugh in the dim light. The way she'd stood her ground when every other woman around him had looked away or looked hungry. She hadn't wanted power. She'd wanted truth. That should have been his warning. They hadn't dated. Not really. They collided. Stolen time between meetings that ended in threats and broken jaws. Nights spent in apartments that were never safe twice. His men stationed outside while he pretended, dangerously, that loving her could exist separate from the life he led. It couldn't. He'd known it every time he watched her sleep and calculated exits. She'd known it every time she flinched at unfamiliar cars. They loved each other like gravity, inevitable, relentless, destructive if ignored. The night everything broke replayed now with merciless clarity. She had been waiting for him, worry etched deep into her face, a phone clutched too tightly in her hand. He'd walked in with blood on his knuckles, not his, and the scent of smoke still clinging to his clothes. "They followed you," she'd said, not accusing, terrified. He'd tried to lie, failed. She hadn't screamed, hadn't cried. She'd gone very, very still. And then she'd said the words that still echoed. "I can't be the thing they used to hurt you." He'd argued. God, he'd fought her with every weapon he had, logic, anger, promises he shouldn't have made. He'd told her he could protect her, that no one would touch her. She'd shaken her head. "You already are," she'd whispered, "just by being with you." He hadn't known what to say to that, so she'd packed while he stood there, helpless for the first time in his life. No goodbye, no forwarding address, nothing but the echo of her absence. He'd honored it, as promised. He hadn't searched. Not when leads fell into his lap. Not when his men offered quietly, loyally to find her. He'd told himself that distance was the last gift he could give her. Some nights it nearly destroyed him. Standing in his office now, years later, he could see it all on her face. The memory hadn't softened for her either. The fear she'd learned to live with. The strength she'd carved out of necessity. She thought she'd disappeared because she had to. She never realized how close she'd come to being erased instead. She spoke now, voice tight. What happened between us doesn't matter anymore. He felt something tear. It mattered enough for you to leave without a word, he said quietly. Her jaw clenched. Because if I stayed, I would have ended up dead. Or worse. The truth of it sat heavy between them. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. They would have used you, he admitted. I knew that. That's why I let you go. Her eyes flashed. You let me go? Yes, he said evenly. I could have found you in a day. I didn't. That was me choosing you over myself. She looked away, blinking rapidly. He didn't tell her about the nights he'd woken up reaching for a body that wasn't there, or the way his rage had sharpened into something colder after she vanished, or how every woman since had felt like a poor imitation of something real. That love, she said shakily, wasn't romantic. It was survival. That doesn't make it less real. It made it unsustainable, she shot back. They stared at each other across a desk that represented everything he'd built to bury that past. And it still bled. He saw now what she hadn't intended. She hadn't just run from him. She'd run so he wouldn't have to choose between her and the crown he wore in blood. He wondered, absurdly, painfully, if she'd ever known that he'd already chosen her. And lost her anyway. The past didn't stay buried. It waited. And now that she stood in front of him again, older, wounded, alive, it was demanding its due. The silence after her confession stretched long enough to ache. She expected anger. Accusation. Some sharp reminder that she'd vanished without a word and left him standing in the wreckage of something neither of them had known how to save. What she didn't expect was restraint. He sat back in his chair, fingers steepled loosely in front of him, expression unreadable in that infuriating way he'd perfected long ago. The man who once ruled back rooms and dimly lit alleys now wore civility like armor, but beneath it she could feel the tension coiled tight. You're right, he said at last, her breath caught. I am? What happened between us shouldn't matter anymore, he repeated slowly. Not professionally. The word landed wrong. Too clean. Too easy. She laughed under her breath. You don't seriously expect me to believe this is professional. I expect you to understand that this company doesn't run on impulse, he replied. And neither do I. He reached for a slim folder on his desk and slid it toward her. She didn't touch it. I didn't come here for favors, she said quietly. And I definitely didn't come to be whatever this is. An employee, he said calmly, with a salary, benefits, and a role you're qualified for. Her eyes flicked to the folder despite herself. Administrative operations, he continued as if reading her thoughts. Executive support. You won't report directly to me. She looked up sharply. Then who? The COO, he said. On paper. On paper. Her chest tightened. This is a mistake? No, he said softly. It's an opportunity. For who? She demanded. You? His jaw flexed. For you. She shook her head, stepping back again, old instincts screaming. I can't work for you. Not after everything. You can, he said evenly. And you will, if you want to keep the lights on. The words weren't cruel. They were accurate. She hated him for knowing. Hated him for being right. He stood then, slowly, rounding the desk but stopping well short of her space. The distance was deliberate, controlled. It made her chest ache in a way closeness never had. I'm not offering this because of what we were, he said. I'm offering it because you need it. And what do you get? She asked. His gaze held hers. Peace of mind. She scoffed. From me? No, he said quietly. From knowing you're not one missed payment away from disappearing again. That hit harder than anything else he could have said. Her shoulders sagged a fraction. Pride fought survival, and survival was winning. It always did. She thought of the envelope on her counter marked Final Notice, of the voicemail she hadn't returned because she already knew what it would say, of the way desperation had hollowed her out enough to walk into this building in the first place. "I won't be your charity case," she said hoarsely. "You won't be," he replied. "You'll be an employee who earns every cent. And if I say no?" He didn't hesitate. "Then you walk out, and I won't stop you." She studied his face, searching for the lie. Found none. "And if I say yes?" she whispered. Something dangerous flickered behind his eyes, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Then we behave like professionals," he said. "We keep the past where it belongs." She almost laughed at that. The past didn't stay where it was told. Still, she reached for the folder. The paper inside was crisp, clean. Numbers that made her stomach drop. A salary she hadn't dared imagine. Benefits that meant doctor visits without calculating pain versus cost. A way out. Her pen hovered over the signature line. "This doesn't mean anything else," she said, voice tight. "It doesn't mean forgiveness, or reopening wounds, or—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "It means a job." She signed. The scratch of pen against paper sounded too loud in the quiet office. Final. Binding. When she looked up, he was watching her like he used to. Too intensely. Too carefully. As if she were something fragile, he no longer trusted himself to touch. "Welcome aboard," he said. She stood quickly, tucking the folder under her arm like armor. "This doesn't change anything," she warned. His lips curved in a humorless smile. "No," he agreed softly. "It only changes everything." The office learned her name quickly. Not because she announced herself, but because people noticed when the CEO's gaze lingered half a second longer than necessary. When meetings paused until she'd taken her seat. When security assignments shifted subtly without explanation. Office walls were thin things when history pressed against them. She kept her head down her first week. Learned systems. Memorized acronyms. Spoke when spoken to. She dressed in neutral colors, hair neat, posture professional. She behaved the way women did when they refused to be noticed. It didn't matter. He noticed everything. Not openly, not recklessly. But she could feel it the way you feel heat through glass, contained, present, undeniable. Their paths crossed with calculated regularity. Elevator rides that were too quiet. Meetings where he stood behind her chair just long enough to read over her shoulder. Files passed hand to hand where fingers brushed by accident and both of them froze as if struck. She hated herself for how her body remembered him. The way her spine straightened when he entered a room. The way her breath shallowed when his voice dropped into that low register he used only when thinking carefully. The way the smell of his cologne, clean, expensive, restrained, dragged her straight back to nights she'd taught herself not to miss. He was careful, painfully so. In meetings he addressed her formally, corrected others when they grew too familiar. Never called her by her first name unless it was necessary. And even then it was controlled, clipped, nothing like the way he used to say it. But control didn't erase memory. In the break room one morning, she reached for the coffee pot at the same moment he did. Their hands collided. Heat flared instantly, sharp, electric, unwanted. She pulled back too fast, spilling coffee onto the counter. "I'm sorry," she said automatically. He reached for a napkin, their shoulders brushing this time. Slower. "Don't," he said quietly. "It was my fault." She looked up at him then, really looked, and saw strain etched beneath his calm. Lines at the edges of his eyes that hadn't been there before. Tension coiled under his skin like a contained storm. This wasn't easy for him either. The realization unsettled her more than his proximity. She tried to draw boundaries where none wanted to stay drawn. Took the long way around the office. Avoided eye contact during presentations. Sent emails instead of walking documents down the hall. He responded in kind, until he didn't. One afternoon, a system failure kept her late. The floor emptied until it was just the two of them and the low hum of servers behind the walls. She sat cross-legged on the floor beside an open cabinet, sleeves rolled, hair falling loose as she worked. "You missed dinner," he said from the doorway. She startled, not because she hadn't heard him approach, but because she'd felt him instead. "I'm almost done," she replied, focused on the task. "Go home." "I will, when you do." She shot him a look. "You're not my keeper." "No," he agreed. "But I am responsible for anyone in this building." "That's generous," she muttered. "It's accurate," he said evenly. Silence filled the space. Not awkward. Charged. He crouched a few feet away, resting his forearms on his knees. Close enough that she felt his presence without being trapped by it. A courtesy he hadn't always possessed in the past. "You shouldn't work this hard," he said after a moment. She laughed softly. "That's rich." His mouth curved faintly. "Fair." She finished the repair and shut the panel with a soft click. Sat back on her heels. Looked at him without flinching for the first time all day. "This can't happen again," she said quietly. His gaze searched her face. "What can't?" "Whatever this is," she replied. "You and me pretending we're strangers when neither of us believes it." He inhaled slowly. "I'm not pretending." "No," she said. "You're restraining yourself." "And you aren't?" She didn't answer. The truth hovered between them, sharp and undeniable. Heat hadn't cooled. It had distilled. Office walls didn't stop old chemistry. They compressed it, sharpened it, turned glances into weapons and restraint into something almost unbearable. When he finally stood and offered her a hand, not to pull her closer, but simply to help her up, she hesitated only a heartbeat before taking it. The contact lingered a fraction too long, enough to remind them both. This wasn't over. It had just learned how to wait. The truth came out the night the building went into lockdown. It wasn't dramatic. No blaring alarms or shouting guards. Just a quiet directive sent floor by floor, lights dimming in common areas, elevators rerouted. A preventative measure, his assistant said calmly. Routine. She knew better. He found her in a conference room with the blinds half drawn, city lights fracturing across the glass. She was standing, arms folded tight around herself like she'd already braced for what was coming. "You should be at home," she said when he entered. "So should you," he replied, closing the door behind him. Not locking it, never trapping her. Silence thickened. The kind that only arrived when two people had circled the same truth for too long. "This isn't about work anymore," she said finally. "No," he agreed. "It hasn't been for a while." She turned to face him, eyes sharp. "Then tell me why. Why now? Why you let me go like I was disposable?" His jaw clenched. He crossed the room slowly, stopping well short of her space. "I didn't let you go because I stopped wanting you," he said. "I let you go because keeping you meant burying you." Her breath caught. "That's not an answer. It's the only honest one." He exhaled slowly, as if unsealing something long contained. "You remember the last month. The calls that went quiet when you answered. The car that followed us twice in 1 week. You thought it was coincidence." "And you didn't?" she shot back. "I knew exactly what it was," he said. "A warning." Her hands curled into fists. "From who?" "From men I owed," he replied flatly. "And men who thought taking you would be leverage." The room felt colder. She shook her head. "You never told me." "I couldn't." "So you decided for me," she said, pain edging into anger. "You decided I didn't get a choice." He didn't deny it. "A blood debt was called in," he continued. "Not money, not territory. A reminder of who I belonged to." Her voice trembled. "So you pushed me away." I tried to scare you, he admitted. Thought if you believed I was the danger, you'd run fast enough. And when that didn't work, I made sure you disappeared. Her eyes widened. I didn't follow you, he said quickly. I didn't touch your life after you left, but I erased your trail so no one else could. The realization hit her like a delayed wound. You burned my bridge so no one could cross it. Yes. She sank into a chair, suddenly breathless. And all this time, I thought you just let me go. I let you live, he said quietly. It's the only thing I've ever been proud of in that chapter of my life. Tears slipped free despite her effort to stop them. I built my entire life on the idea that leaving you was my choice, that I was strong enough to walk away. You were, he said immediately. You just didn't know how much weight you were carrying. She laughed weakly. And you? I paid the debt, he replied, in ways that don't belong in this building. She didn't ask how. She didn't need to. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was mournful. Two people standing in the aftermath of a war neither of them had known they were fighting alone. I didn't run because I stopped loving you, she whispered. I know, he said. I ran because loving you felt like waiting to die. And I let you, he said, voice low, because I knew one of us had to survive without blood on their hands. Outside, the lockdown lifted quietly. Systems returning to normal. Threat past, for now. Inside the room, the past finally exhaled. Nothing was fixed. Nothing forgiven. But for the first time, the truth stood between them, sharp, painful, and real. And it demanded to be reckoned with. The realization didn't come all at once. It seeped in slowly, quietly, the way cold does when you've been standing still for too long. At first, it was small things. The way security moved, not casually, but with precision. How names were never raised, only nodded to. How meetings happened after hours, floors cleared without explanation, assistants replaced midweek without farewells. How certain visitors never passed reception logs, yet everyone knew to stand when they entered. She told herself it was just how power worked at this level. Wealth built habits, influence bred silence. But then there were the calls. She was in his outer office late one evening, organizing files long past when she should have gone home, when his voice dropped behind the closed door. Not raised, not angry, controlled. I said not tonight, he murmured. A pause. No, that asset isn't negotiable. Another pause, longer. You misunderstand. This isn't a request. The air shifted. Not tense, decisive. When he emerged minutes later, jacket back on, tie loosened, his expression carefully neutral, she looked up from her laptop and saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen since before she ran. Not the CEO. The man beneath the suit. You can head out, he said. I'll finish the rest. She didn't move. Who was that? He studied her, calculated, careful. Business. Her mouth tightened. That's what you called it last time, too. Silence stretched between them. Not fragile. Assessing. You didn't come back into my life just to fetch coffee, she said quietly. And you didn't build this place by playing clean. That depends on how you define clean, he replied. She stood. I define it as not making people afraid to say no. His jaw flexed once. People are afraid long before I speak to them. The truth of that landed heavier than any confession. Over the next weeks, the picture sharpened. Shell companies traced back to ports. Legal teams that specialized not in litigation, but in quiet resolutions. A private jet owned by a subsidiary that didn't technically exist. Board members with backgrounds that read like resumes until you noticed what was missing. Gaps that had no explanation at all. And then there was the night she followed instinct instead of protocol. She was supposed to leave. He'd said so. But she forgot her phone and doubled back through a service hallway she'd never used before. That was when she heard voices. Low, urgent, not meant for corporate ears. Shipment cleared, someone said. But customs asked questions. They always do, he replied calmly. That's why we answer the ones they're allowed to ask. A beat. And the others? They don't. She froze. When she stepped back into the main corridor, heart hammering, every memory she'd buried rushed forward at once. The long nights waiting for him to come home smelling like rain and metal. The unexplained bruises on his knuckles. The way he never flinched when danger brushed too close, but always moved her behind him. She hadn't escaped the danger. She'd only changed the scenery. That understanding settled into her bones the night his driver picked her up after work instead of the car service. This wasn't scheduled, she said, sliding into the back seat. No, the driver replied respectfully. But he asked that you not walk alone tonight. Her chest tightened. Why? The man met her eyes in the mirror. Because certain people noticed you again. Again. Later, in the quiet of his office overlooking the city, she finally said the words she'd been avoiding. You didn't stop being dangerous, she said. You just learned how to hide it better. He didn't deny it. I didn't become what I am to hurt people, he said. I became it so no one could hurt what was mine. Her voice dropped. Including me? His gaze softened, just a fraction. Especially you. Fear curled in her stomach, sharp and familiar. Not of him, but of the truth she could no longer deny. Walking away once hadn't broken the shadow. It had followed, and now that she stood beneath it again, she understood something that terrified her more than all of it. He was still protecting her, and the danger hadn't disappeared. It had simply been waiting. It started with a look, not a stare. Those were easy to dismiss. This was different. Calculating. Lingering. The kind of glance that didn't assess beauty, but value. She felt it across a boardroom table during a meeting she wasn't supposed to attend. She was there to take notes, nothing more. Background. Quiet. Forgettable. At least that's what she'd believed. The man across from her, mid-40s, immaculate suit, smile that never reached his eyes, paused mid-sentence when she shifted in her chair. His gaze flicked to her tablet, then to her face, then back to the CEO at the head of the table. Didn't know you'd started bringing personal staff into negotiations, he said lightly. The room went still. She's my executive assistant, he replied just as smoothly. And she hears what I hear. The man smiled. Lucky her. Later in the elevator, she finally exhaled. Who was that? Someone who counts losses the way others count favors, he said. And you shouldn't worry about him. She frowned. That didn't sound convincing. It wasn't meant to be. That night, her phone rang from a blocked number. She didn't answer. The voicemail came seconds later. Soft, polite, interested. You've done very well for yourself, working so close to power. I'd love to speak with you sometime. Informally. Her stomach dropped. She showed him the message the next morning. His jaw tightened instantly, not in surprise, but recognition. They moved faster than I expected, he said. They? Her voice shook. Moved for what? For you. The word sat between them like a loaded gun. From that moment on, the world shifted. Security doubled without announcement. Her badge was upgraded. Her schedule quietly altered so she was never alone. Not walking to her car, not leaving the building, not even stepping into a cafe downstairs without eyes on every entrance. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was marked. The calls escalated, not directly to her, never reckless. They went through third parties, invitations disguised as opportunities. Mentions slipped into conversations she wasn't supposed to overhear. She steadies him, someone said once, thinking she'd already left the room. That makes her dangerous. No, another voice replied. That makes her useful. The first threat came wrapped in courtesy. A package arrived at her apartment while she was at work. No return address. Inside was a single object, a framed photo of her walking into the office beside him 2 weeks earlier. Time-stamped, taken from across the street. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She called him. He was at her door in less than 10 minutes. Afterward, the apartment was deemed unsafe. Temporary relocation, he called it. She called it panic, wrapped in control. "They're testing boundaries," he explained, "seeing how close they can get without provoking a response. And what happens when they decide testing isn't enough." His silence told her everything. She became leverage the day they realized she could change him. Deals stalled unless she was present. Negotiations softened when she entered a room, and hardened when she left. Offers were made to him that included vague references to her future, her comfort, her security, as if she were a chess piece that could be repositioned with the right incentive. One man was bold enough to say it outright. "You could save yourself a lot of trouble," he'd said calmly over drinks, "by letting her spend some time with us. Just long enough to prove a point." The glass in his hand shattered. After that, the rules changed. He stopped pretending she wasn't part of the war, stopped shielding her from the truth. "They won't hurt you unless they want to hurt me," he told her one night, voice low, "and they want that very much." Fear coiled tight in her chest. "So what am I supposed to do?" He looked at her, not like a boss, not like a king protecting his territory, but like a man staring at the one weakness he'd never intended to expose. "Stay alive," he said simply, "and stay with me." She understood then. She was no longer collateral. She was currency, and in his world, currency was always fought over. The first rule arrived without being announced. "Step back and..." She discovered it when she tried to leave the building alone. Her bag was on her shoulder, coat already on, mind fixed on nothing more dramatic than going home and taking a shower long enough to think. She reached the lobby, nodded at the receptionist she now knew by name, and headed for the revolving doors. A man stepped into her path. Not aggressive, not threatening. Just there. "Miss," he said politely, holding up a hand. "Your car is waiting." "I didn't request a car," she replied, irritation slipping into her voice despite herself. He smiled apologetically. "I know." Her phone vibrated almost immediately. "Come back upstairs." She closed her eyes for half a second, then turned and walked toward the elevators. When she stepped into his office moments later, he was already standing, jacket on, phone in his hand. "I'm not a prisoner," she said, the words sharp enough to cut. "No," he agreed calmly. "You're protected." That looked a lot like being stopped from leaving. He met her gaze evenly. "Because I knew you wouldn't understand the risk." She laughed once, humorless. "You don't get to decide what I understand." "I get to decide what I won't allow," he countered quietly. The line between them shifted. Thin, bright, dangerous. Security increased after that. Not just around her apartment, but around her. A driver she hadn't approved. A guard stationed outside her floor. Doors that locked behind her with silent efficiency. Meetings he once let her sit through now ended when tensions rose, his hand already guiding her away before she could protest. Professional boundaries blurred so subtly, it was disorienting. She stopped being his assistant and started becoming something else. Someone who waited for him to walk her places. Someone whose schedule was approved instead of suggested. Someone who felt eyes on her at all times. It wasn't fear that finally pushed her to confront him again. It was exhaustion. "You don't ask anymore," she said one night, standing in his penthouse kitchen while he poured 2 glasses of wine she hadn't asked for. "You decide." He handed her a glass anyway. "If I ask and you say no, I'd still do what was necessary." "So you're just cutting out the illusion of choice?" "I'm cutting out the delay," he replied. Her fingers tightened around the stem. "That's not protection. That's ownership." He stilled. Slowly, deliberately, He set his own glass down, untouched. "Look at me," he said. She did. She saw tension in his jaw, restraint coiled tight beneath his composed exterior. "You think I don't see how thin this line is?" he continued. "You think I don't hear myself when I give orders instead of explanations?" "Then stop," she said quietly. "Because this makes me feel like I ran straight back into a cage." Pain flickered across his face, raw and unguarded. "I never built a cage for you." "Intent doesn't change impact," she replied. Silence fell heavy between them. "I'm not trying to own you," he said finally. "I'm trying to make sure you live long enough to hate me for it." "And if hating you isn't the worst outcome?" she asked. His gaze dropped, just for a moment. "In my world, possession is how people show they care." She swallowed. "That's not how it works in mine." He stepped closer, but stopped short, as if crossing that last inch would shatter something fragile. "Then tell me where the line is," he said. "Because every instinct I have says, if I loosen my grip, they'll take you." "And every instinct I have says if you don't," she whispered. "You already have." The truth hung between them, aching and unresolved. That night he compromised. Barely. Security remained, but he asked before assigning escorts. He explained instead of commanding. He let her leave alone once, watching from the window until her car disappeared. Care and control still looked frighteningly similar. But for the first time she saw something else beneath it all. Fear. Not of losing power. Of losing her. And that realization was somehow more dangerous than all the men circling them in the dark. The secret surfaced the way the most dangerous truths always did, by accident, through a crack neither of them had been watching. She found it because she was tired. Tired of being watched. Tired of asking permission without asking. Tired of jumping when her phone buzzed and wondering whether the message would be protective or prophetic. So when insomnia dragged her out of bed long past midnight, she wandered into the study she rarely entered alone. His sanctuary. The room smelled like leather and cedar and something darker beneath it all, iron maybe. The walls were lined with books he'd actually read, not the decorative kind. Files sat neatly stacked on the desk, locked, labeled, controlled. Except for one drawer. It wasn't open. Not fully. Just a fraction. Enough. She told herself she was looking for a pen. That was the lie she clung to as she pulled the drawer out another inch. The envelope inside wasn't labeled. Just thick cream paper, worn at the edges, opened and resealed too many times. She knew before she read it that it would ruin something. Her name was handwritten across the front. Inside were 3 things. A medical report dated years ago, a photograph, and a letter she remembered writing in a shaking hand. Never mailed, never finished. Her lungs locked. The report came first. Ultrasound images, dates, notations she recognized instantly, because she had memorized them once in a clinic bathroom. Alone, terrified, determined to survive. She pressed a hand to her mouth. The photograph showed her on a park bench 6 months after she left him. Hood up, face thinner, arms wrapped protectively around herself, around a child in a stroller. And the letter was addressed to him. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want him to grow up with blood on his hands before he knew what his name meant." The room tilted. Footsteps sounded behind her. She didn't turn. He stopped when he saw what she was holding. Silence slammed into place, dense and suffocating. "You knew," she said hoarsely. "You knew, and you never said a word." He didn't deny it. "I found out 3 months after you left," he said quietly. "My people were tracking threats, not you. But they brought me the report anyway." Her hands shook. "And you did nothing?" "I did everything," he replied. "Just not what you think." She spun then, fury and fear tangling together. "You had no right to keep this from me." I had no right to take him from you, he shot back, or to drag him into a war he never chose. Then why keep it? She demanded. Why keep this like a relic? Because it's the only proof that stopping myself was the hardest thing I've ever done. The words punched the air from her lungs. You changed the rules, she whispered. All this time, I thought I was leverage because of you. His voice dropped. You're leverage because of him. The weight of that truth crushed down on her. Every enemy circling us now, he continued, would kill to know he exists. Not to hurt me, to replace me. Her heart slammed wildly. They'd use him. They'd raise him, he said flatly, or erase him. She staggered back, the implications spiraling faster than she could catch them. So everything, the security, the control, the desperation, it's not just about losing me. No, he said. It's about not losing my son to a world that devours bloodlines. The power balance shifted in that moment. She hadn't just stepped back into his orbit. She had brought the future with her. You don't get to decide his fate alone, she said. I never wanted to, he replied. I waited for you to come back on your terms. And if I never had? His jaw tightened. Then I would have died knowing I kept my promise. The promise to let her go. The silence that followed was different from all the others they'd shared. It wasn't grief or tension. It was reckoning. Desire had been a complication before. Now it was irrelevant. Because there was something greater between them now. Something that made love dangerous, made enemies inevitable, and made walking away impossible. The past hadn't just bled. It had left a heartbeat behind, and everything would circle it now. The choice came to her in pieces, not all at once. In the quiet moments first, when the penthouse was asleep except for the city humming far below, and she sat beside a window with her knees pulled to her chest, staring at reflections instead of looking outward. In the spaces between breaths, when she imagined what leaving would look like now. Not the sharp, desperate escape of before. This time it would be planned. Clean. He would make it so. A safe house overseas. A new name. Silence wrapped in security. He would ensure she and the child vanished so thoroughly that even history would forget the outline of them. He would let her go again. That was what terrified her most. She'd spent years believing distance meant safety, that absence was armor. But now she understood the truth she had refused to see before. Walking away hadn't kept them out of the war. It had only delayed it. He found her on the terrace just before dawn, jacket draped over his arm, eyes tired in a way sleep wouldn't touch. You didn't rest, he said softly. Neither did you. He leaned against the railing beside her, careful to keep space, even now. The restraint was deliberate, respectful. It hurt more than any attempt to claim her would have. I can make arrangements by tonight, he said after a moment. Planes are ready. You won't hear my name again unless you want to. She laughed quietly. You always offer freedom like it's a sacrifice. It is, he replied. For me. The words landed deep. She turned to face him fully. If I stay, this doesn't end. It gets worse. Yes. People will come, not just for you. Yes. And my son. Her voice faltered. We'll never be invisible again, he finished gently. Neither will I. She closed her eyes. Choosing him didn't mean choosing love. It meant choosing consequences. It meant learning the rules of a world where loyalty was currency and mercy was rare. Where safety came from strength, not distance. Where her child would inherit not just his eyes, but his legacy, his enemies, his gravity. If she stayed, she would never again pretend to be ordinary. If she left, she would always be running from shadows that knew her name. I escaped once, she whispered, and it still followed. He said nothing. I thought staying away was enough, she continued. That love was the danger. Love is never the danger, he said quietly. What people do for it is. She looked at him then. The man who had built an empire on shadows and restraint, who had bled and bartered and broken his own instincts to keep a promise no one had asked him to make. He hadn't chased her. He hadn't taken what he could. He had waited. And now the war was at the door, whether she chose him or not. If I stay, she said, I won't be owned. I won't be hidden, and I won't be silent. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. I would expect nothing less. I'll fight, she added, and I won't let our child become a weapon. His eyes darkened, not with anger, but with resolve. Then we fight together. The word together changed everything. She exhaled slowly, the weight of inevitability settling into something like clarity. Walking away now wouldn't make her brave. It would make her absent. And absence was a luxury they no longer had. She reached for his hand, not impulsively, not desperately, deliberately. This isn't just choosing you, she said. It's choosing the war. He closed his fingers around hers, firm and steady. It always was. The city woke around them, light creeping across glass and steel. She didn't know who would fall first, or how much blood the future would demand. But she knew this. Leaving now would cost more than staying ever could. And this time, she wasn't running. The first shot was never meant for him. She understood that the instant the glass shattered. They were in the car, moving fast but not reckless. The city blurring into streaks of light as his driver took a route no navigation app would ever suggest. Her hand was in his, not clutched, not hidden, just there, grounded, chosen. Then came the sound. Sharp. Final. Wrong. The rear window exploded inward, safety glass spiderwebbing instead of slicing, the force of it rocking the car. The driver swore once, hard, and accelerated. Another shot rang out, too close this time, snapping something inside her chest loose. She didn't scream. She turned. Her. The message was clear now. He shifted instantly, body angling without thought, one arm coming up, pulling her down and in, shielding her with an instinct that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with choice. Stay down, he said, calm as steel. Whatever happens, do not let go of me. Sirens followed, his, not the city's. The convoy closed in fast, choreography unfolding with brutal efficiency. Cars boxed them in, diverted traffic, blocked intersections that no one would remember being blocked. The Empire moved when he commanded it, but the attack didn't end there. The call came minutes later, routed through layers of encryption so deep it made her skin crawl. They know, the voice said on the other end, about the child. They've gone public. Financial regulators, anonymous tips, offshore leaks. They're hitting everything. She watched his face as the words landed. No surprise. No panic. Just resolve hardening into something lethal. Lock it down, he said. Initiate Protocol Black. The call ended. She stared at him. What does that mean? It means, he replied evenly, the game they wanted is over. They reached the safe house just as dawn began to break, red and raw at the edges. Inside, the walls hummed with quiet power, screens alive, voices controlled, movement swift and precise. This wasn't chaos. It was command. And then he did something she hadn't expected. He stopped, turned to her, took both her hands in his. This is where you leave, he said. Her breath hitched. What? I can end this without you here, he continued. I've already arranged for extraction. Within the hour, you'll be out. Clean. Untouched. She searched his face. The man who once let her go stood there again, but changed, scarred by years of restraint and blood and waiting. You said you'd fight together, she whispered. I will, he said. But not if it costs you. And if I stay? She asked. His jaw tightened. Then everything I am becomes a target, with you beside me. Something inside her clicked into place then. This wasn't about love versus fear anymore. It was about agency. About standing where she chose to stand, not where the world pushed her. She stepped closer. I didn't come back just to be protected, she said. And I didn't choose you to watch you burn alone. His eyes searched hers, measuring, pleading, honoring the weight of what she was saying. You don't owe me this, he said hoarsely. No, she agreed. I choose it. Sirens wailed in the distance. News alerts flashed on the screens. His name, his companies, whispers turning to headlines. The empire shaking, but not falling. Yet, this was the peak. The line where everything broke or held. He looked at her one last time, as if etching her into memory in case fate was cruel. Then he nodded. Then stand here, he said. Not behind me, beside me. The bridge burned behind them, not in flames, but in certainty. There would be no more running, no more letting go disguised as love. Whatever came next would come for both of them, and when the world moved to take him down, it would find something it hadn't planned for. A woman who stayed, not because she was trapped, but because she chose the empire, the man and the future they would either defend together or rebuild from ashes.